Hello, my name is Haley Huff. I am a substance use prevention specialist and I work for Pines Behavioral Health. Today we have a presentation about alcohol and brain development for youth. And today I have presenting is Josh Englehart. He works for the health department for Branch County as a health educator. Um, and we look forward to doing this presentation.
Definitely,
There
definitely.
you
So
go.
thank you, Haley, thank you for having me on here. Yeah, so this is actually a presentation that I did a couple years ago. It was a little bit some slight revisions to this presentation, but as Haley said, this is a presentation that I put together to really talk about and discuss the ramifications that alcohol has on the developing brain. And it's something once again as we'll go through here in the slides, but many times we can talk about just the circumstantial things that can take place, when speaking about young people and alcohol and drinking, getting in car crashes, alcohol poisoning, and
Absolutely.
things like that. And these are always things that, young people may come back or debate about going, well, this may never happen to me. I think that the benefit of a presentation like this is really just talking about our bodies, the science of our bodies, the inner workings of our bodies. So if you have a body, and particularly if you have a brain, you then have emotions by default. So if you have a brain and you have emotions, alcohol will have ramifications in some way, shape, or form on your brain and on your emotions. But taking into account, once again, the young brain and things like that, I think it's important for people to get the education in regards to what alcohol does to the brain in general and
Mhm.
how that affects emotions, and then looking at that and how that coincides with young people and the developing brain while those emotions are being developed in a person. So I will go ahead and share my screen so we can get the
Thank you.
PowerPoint up. So you guys should see called this presentation a little bit different. It's called Alcohol and the Youthful Brain. Like I said, the presentation that I did a couple years ago was that of alcohol, emotions, and kids, or alcohol, kids, and emotions. So once again, the same concept as Haley said, though. My name is Josh Winglehart. I am a health educator with the Branch Hillsdale St. Joseph Community Health Agency. Before I go running my mouth about the topic, I do want to give you guys a little bit about, a little information about myself. This is a photo that was taken this last December at my oldest son's wedding. He is the big individual that is sitting in the or standing in the front there in the gray suit. I am married. I have 6 children. So topics like this are something that are near and dear to my heart, especially as a parent. My wife, as well. We like to have these conversations with our kids. Also, getting a lot of information and feedback from them as well regarding kind of the social scene and social circle when it comes to certain things like drugs and alcohol. By no means are they coming to us in essence and like telling on kids, but they're very great at us going to them and being intentional with our conversations with them and them interacting with us as well. So that is something that later on in this discussion, this presentation, that I will stress and point out as parents that we need to be better at and need to do is having those intentional conversations with our kids so often and so easily, especially in our culture today. We may think that our kids won't listen to us and they don't want to hear from us, but I'm here to tell you once again, as a parent with 6 kids, that it's their job to kind of act like they don't care what you think, but they actually do. And there's a lot of power still in the home. The majority of the power still lies in the home. And the majority of the influence in their life still lies with you as the parent, even though that their world has opened up and they have all these friends and all these things going on. You are still mom or you are still dad, and you have a heavy influence in their life. So by going to them and being intentional with those conversations, really holds a huge weight. So once again, I'm talking as an individual that has a kid as old as now 26, all the way now as young as 10. So just be intentional with those conversations. But I'm truly a blessed man with awesome kids. So little disclaimer that I like to say, I'm not a doctor. So I do not prescribe anything. I also want to make a note, say that I am not demonizing alcohol as well. Once again, what I'm trying to do is just provide some factual and scholarly information regarding alcohol. And these are things that I always challenge people to do. I do it as a pastor and I do it as a person that presents as a health educator to test the things that I say during this presentation. Just as I am responsible for speaking and saying factual things to you, I challenge you as the person watching this presentation to be responsible with how you receive the information and testing and weighing the stuff that I speak and say as well. I will make sure that I have references to the information that I give as well, all coming from scholarly sources. So this is not me trying to put a bad image on alcohol or anything like that, but once again, trying to provide some factual information. So as I have on that third point, I am a father, husband, and once again, a health educator, just trying to provide some information based on studies performed and reported, once again, from scholarly sources. So, some facts that I think we need to consider when we are looking at alcohol. Okay, alcohol is the most used substance amongst young people in the United States. So, a 2019 Youth Risk Behavior Survey found that among high school students, 29% of them drank alcohol, 14% of them binge drink. Now, the definition here of binge drinking is consuming five or more drinks on an occasion for men or four or more drinks on an occasion for women. And we'll unpack that a little bit more down the road in the presentation. 5% of drivers drove after drinking alcohol, and 17% rode with a driver who had been drinking. Now, I purposely bolded out an underlined survey in high school students. And the reason why I did that is there's a caveat to this, which I think goes along with any survey. This is just information that has been provided by those who have been surveyed. Okay. I believe that these numbers are probably much higher. So these are just numbers that are coming from kids who participated in the survey, especially those that are in the high school age group. Okay. And then also looking at underage drinking and how it is associated actually with adult drinking. So this goes back to what I said earlier about the influence that we have as adults when it comes to our kids. Studies show that there's a relationship between underage drinking behaviors and the drinking behaviors of adult relatives, adults in the same household and adults in the same community and state. And I'll unpack that here in a little bit. There's also a relationship between youth and adult drinking, including binge drinking, which we just talked about a little bit ago, in states and communities. A 5% increase in binge drinking among adults in a community is associated with a 12% increase in the chance of underage drinking. And among adolescents whose peers drink alcohol, those whose parents binge drink are more likely to drink alcohol than those whose parents do not. Now, when I speak about communities and states and all of that, we're kind of looking back at a macro point of view. Okay. I'm not speaking so much about that micro point of view, once again, like within the household, but it is proven that certain communities may have a certain outlook on when it comes to alcohol. And what do I mean by that? Maybe there's not a lot of education in the school system about the dangers of underage drinking. Maybe there's just not a lot of general education regarding alcohol, right? And the effects that it has on a brain, like what we're trying to present in this. All of those things have an influence over a perceived stigma of alcohol, right? So if there's never really any conversation, a young person is growing up around people that maybe binge drink quite frequently, that is just going to be seen as kind of a common way of life, maybe for that young person, right? And we all can attest to this when it comes to our childhood and growing up, right? Things that we just see that is normal, things that are perceived as a usual, situation or usual occurrence, we don't question it. We don't think twice about it. This takes place once again in that macro viewpoint in communities, in states, all of that. So if a young person is growing up in, let's say, a small rural community where drinking is just the thing to do during the week and on the weekends, and there's no real education around it, the likelihood of that young person drinking at an early age is increased because, once again, they don't really perceive it to be anything of concern. There's no stigma that's associated with it. And sometimes those stigmas are good because they allow people to stop and think twice before they do something once, and it kind of acts as like a governor for behavior. So now we want to kind of look at the emotional characteristics. So this is a presentation, once again, on youth and the brain. So when we're speaking about youth in particular with this presentation, we're going to look at mostly the ages of 12 to 18. And this is really going to be the jump off point or the foundation in which this presentation is going to operate from, because the information I'm going to give you through the majority of the presentation is going to be that of what alcohol does to the brain. With that being said, and with that being set in your guys' brain, I want you then to take that information that will be presented And we're going to revisit this slide and then how we can link that up to these characteristics. I think we'll develop a picture of why alcohol could be dangerous for a young person to consume, especially while their brain is in that development state. So emotional characteristics here, and once again, I have to say amen to all these as a parent of six. When it comes to 12 to 18-year-olds, stormy and conflicted, right? Uncertain, feel inadequate and insecure in trying to establish independence and identity, worry about appearances, ability, and relationships. Many of you adults watching this can go back in time and go, yep, that was probably me. Peer group influences can change attitudes and values. That's a huge component to this, right? When we are between the ages of 12 and 18, we develop kind of these social circles, if they're big or they're small, but those social circles really hold a heavy weight in our life because for the first time in our life, we're starting to branch out from the norm of the household, from mom and dad. So these friends come in and what they do matters a lot, right? So if these friends are participating in certain behaviors, they're participating in certain hobbies, it's easy for kids between the ages of 12 and 18 to really cling to that, to not think twice about it. They're more concerned about what their peers think as opposed to the actual consequences that can come from certain behaviors. And then when we look at later years, even from 19 to early 20s, the brain usually is developed fully around the age of 25 and 26. So even in the 19-year-old to early 20 stage, the brain's still in that maturation phase. You're going to deal with self-identity established, and you feel more comfortable though with who you are. You focus on who you'll become. You'll gain more control of feelings and you'll become more mature emotionally. But there are still ramifications in regards to maybe heavy alcohol consumption or other kind of drug use as well. So this is something though that I want you guys to kind of put this slide in your brain, remember it, because once again, as we go on and we start to have this conversation, and present this information regarding alcohol consumption. Once again, my hope is that you'll see why underage drinking can be detrimental to a young person, especially if they drink heavily. So, with that being said, we want to talk about science, and I think science is important. It's factual. I'm a dad, so I always like to include dad jokes. So I apologize if you don't find this to be a funny dad joke in the picture, but I think science is critical because you can't debate and argue against science in many cases. Once again, as I said in the earlier in the presentation, a kid can debate with you about if they're going to get in a car accident. They can debate with you if something's going to happen this way or that way. But when it comes to science, we all have physiological effects that take place within the body that can have psychological effects on our mind and on our emotions. So I think that's why science is crucial when talking about this. So we're just going to kind of go through a little bit more of a street level version here of how alcohol is broken down in the body. When alcohol is consumed, it is absorbed into the blood, or it is absorbed into the blood from the stomach and the intestines. The enzymes begin to metabolize the alcohol. The liver converts the alcohol or the ethanol to acetaldehyde. Okay, acetaldehyde can cause significant damage to the liver because most alcohol is broken down into this toxic byproduct. And I do like to inform the people this important truth. Alcohol is a poison. It is. When it converts from ethanol to acetaldehyde, that is a toxin that is in the body. Some alcohol is broken down in the pancreas and brain, where acetaldehyde can also damage cells and tissue as well. And to give just a little bit more information and insight regarding acetaldehyde, when it is present, or although it is present in the body in a short period of time, it is highly toxic and it is a known carcinogen. So when you hear about cigarette smoke and all the different chemicals and carcinogens in cigarettes, acetaldehyde falls under that category of a carcinogen. It does damage DNA and it actually prevents your body from repairing the damage. So once again, in this information, it is not to demonize alcohol. These are just facts. This is scholarly information about what takes place when a person does consume alcohol, even in the smallest amount. And I think that that is important to note that people understand and realize that. So in just this image here, once again, this is kind of more of a visual that people can utilize when it comes to how alcohol works in the body. You see this chart here. When you drink alcohol, you have the first part there, it goes into the body. Then it goes down into the heart. You see that it's absorbed. Most of it is absorbed into the stomach, actually the small intestine, and then the stomach. then you see that it actually works its way to the brain. And then even the liver breaks down the alcohol as well. They are starting to find out, though, once again, the alcohol and this metabolism process is taking place more often in the brain than they previously realized. But it is important to remember that. So once again, the liver does much of the work in the conversion process, but it is the neurotoxin acetaldehyde that makes us feel tipsy and or drunk. So that is the when you that conversion takes place, that's what's going to happen and why a person starts to feel woozy and a little inebriated and things like that. Some of the alcohol, though, like I said, we ingest is converted into a non-toxic form called acetate. So it's like a salt. Um, and that can actually be utilized somewhat as an energy source, but it's a very poor one. That's why you hear people say that alcohol is empty calories, because there's really no nutritional value to it, even when it's converted from ethanol to acetaldehyde to acetate. But it does actually, a small part does convert to that acetate or that salt component, which once again, technically can be looked at as an energy source. So with all that being said, all the science, what's the point of that? Why is this of concern? Well, alcohol, in other words, it's intrusive when it comes to our body cells, being that it's both water and fat soluble, which is what makes consuming too much of it too frequent. And once again, if you're young, very dangerous. So alcohol, it does interfere with the brain's communication pathways, and it can affect the way the brain looks and works. This disruption can cause change in mood and behavior, and it makes it harder to think clearly and move and coordination. Alcohol is not picky on where it goes in the brain since it's both, once again, water and fat soluble. It can go to any part of the brain. And once again, studies show that people who binge drink, who are considered heavy or chronic drinkers, alter their brain's communication pathways over time, altering baseline mood and physical actions. And I think that that's important to realize. And we'll kind of go into that a little bit more when we speak about like the chemicals and hormones and stuff like that within the body. But alcohol, since it can go through that blood-brain barrier and the parts of the brain that it really starts to affect, you have your high brain and your low brain. Your high brain's more so of the rationale and your mood and your emotion regulation, and low brain is more just on basic movements and functions. When you're growing up, especially between the ages of 12 and 18, those two parts of the brain are really trying to establish a communication and function in this kind of like a coordinated, synergistic way. Alcohol really disrupts that component. And what can happen is, especially when we overly consume alcohol at a young age, and this even can happen to adults when they're older, is those baseline behaviors and moods and emotions start to become the permanent mood and emotion and behavior in the person. Because once again, that neurotoxin, that acetaldehyde, it affects the brain in so many ways, to where once again the person actually can become different in how they regulate mood and how they act, how they behave, and all those things. And I do want to go back to this because I think it's important to define the different drinking levels, especially the levels that we've been talking about throughout this presentation. Drinking in moderation, you can look at it. Adults of legal drinking age can choose not to drink or to drink in moderation by limiting intake to 2 drinks or less in a day for men and 1 drink or less in a day for women. Binge drinking, a pattern of drinking that corresponds to consuming 5 or more drinks for a male or 4 or more drinks for females, blood alcohol content of 0.08% in about a 2 hour span. Now, a lot of people, once again, I hear it often where people are like, well, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have an addiction. I'm not dependent. That may be the case, but you can still look and evaluate the way that you drink and go, okay, do I still fall in line with one of these categories? The final one here is heavy and chronic drinking for men. This is consuming more than 4 drinks on any day or more than 14 drinks per week. Women, this is 3 drinks on any day or more than 7 drinks per week. And the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, they define heavy alcohol use as binge drinking on 5 or more days in the past month. So once again, when we look at that, you might stop and think, well, I might not be an alcoholic. I might not drink all the time throughout the day and all that. But once again, I think when people put their eyes on these definitions and kind of the layout of these different drinking levels, A lot of people are surprised and shocked that they fall under one of these, right? And this is drinking levels here, the binge drinking and the heavy and chronic drinking that is scientifically proven to have adverse effects on the brain. And I'm speaking right now just even about adult brains, fully matured brains. So I want you to go back to that slide that we were talking about 12 to 18-year-olds and their characteristics, their brain developing, the high brain and the low brain trying to connect. Imagine drinking like this at that age and the ramifications that it will have on that connection between the high brain and the low brain, right? Emotions are disrupted, even motor movements, gesticulation, and all of those things, coordination, all of those things are affected heavily, especially if you fall in line with either being a binge drinker or a heavy or chronic drinker. This isn't about being an alcoholic. This is just about consuming alcohol at a high level. So this, once again, as I just talked about, this disrupts emotion. So we can see this different feeling chart here. But once again, when we look at the brain and we look at a 12 to 18-year-old developing brain, or even as I said, 19 to early 20s, but we're speaking really about that 12 to 18-year-old range, as those emotions are trying to become regulated. And as the young person is just trying to figure out life, their physical surroundings, their peer group, and all of that, so many things are disrupted within the brain. The emotional state is disrupted in the brain, right? Proper emotional, regulation and response to certain situations is disrupted in the brain. And we'll go into that a little bit more when it comes to like hormone and GABA and serotonin and things like that. This is just a chart that I like to show once again in regards to, talking about just the different parts of the brain in general. But once again, alcohol is not picky where it goes because alcohol infiltrates that blood-brain barrier that is designed to protect the brain, right? But alcohol can go anywhere in the brain. So there's nowhere in the brain that is necessarily void from the effects of the neurotoxin alcohol or acetaldehyde. So alcohol slows down the cerebral cortex and the gray matter that covers the brain. So I want you guys to think of, the brain and then think of it kind of covered in this gray matter with all these little transmitters and things running through it. That is kind of the highway and the pathway of our brain's activity and the way that it works. Um, it slows down the cerebral cortex and gray matters. It works with information from a person's senses. In the cerebral cortex, alcohol can affect thought processes, leading to potentially poor judgment. Alcohol depresses inhibition, right? Leading one to become more talkative and more confident. Some of you guys, when you've been in drinking situations, right? I know of people, they go, I'm going to have a drink before I go to a social setting because it lowers that inhibition. It relaxes them a little bit. Some of you may know people that drink, and as they get a couple drinks in them, they start to speak louder. They gesticulate and move around a lot more. Alcohol is affecting that part of the brain. So alcohol blunts the senses. It increases the threshold for pain. The blood alcohol content increases, and these effects get more and more pronounced. We can look at this once again at the image of the brain and see all the different functions each part of the brain is responsible for. Alcohol, once again, has an effect everywhere due to it being able to pass through that blood-brain barrier. Just a few drinks for many people is all it takes to start showing alcohol's effects. So you don't need to be a binge drinker or a chronic drinker to feel the effects of alcohol. So you may notice first a lot of initial effects that are taking place in the frontal lobe. Then you'll notice after a few drinks, people will start to once again talk a little louder, move around, gesticulate a little bit more, and all of that. And people have asked me, they're like, once again, what is the effects when it comes to alcohol? Like, why do men tend to be able to quote hold their liquor more than women? It does boil down to lean mass. Lean mass does contain more water. Men tend to hold more lean mass than women. Therefore, their bodies have more water throughout the span and the space of their body. So the alcohol's effects on their body, and particularly their brain, is not as pronounced and profound as it would be on a woman because women tend to naturally hold on to more fat as well. So that's usually why you hear the term, being able to hold your liquor more and things like that. A person that is, extremely lean, lower body fat percentage, it's going to take more drinks for them to really start to feel some profound effects of alcohol than it would be for a person that has a little bit more body fat percentage. But once again, this is something I think is just important for us to realize and remember. Once again, these effects can start to become, though, the normal behavior of a person over time if they are a chronic or heavy or binge drinking individual. It starts to alter the pathways of the brain. Alcohol does, the neurotoxin, acetaldehyde. So a person, yes, over time after drinking can begin to talk louder in a sober state. They can begin to gesticulate and move more and become more physically animated in a sober state because the alcohol is altering their baseline moods and behaviors and mimicking that more of what the person may perceive to be when they're actually drunk. So, very interesting stuff when it comes to that in the science way. So, and once again, we start speaking about, hormones and, why alcohol may feel good to consume and what it does. I think that once again, there's a truth that needs to be spoken about why, once again, consuming alcohol at high levels, especially for a young person, a developing brain, is very important to realize and understand. So first one we're going to talk about is GABA. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it affects inhibition in the brain. This means that it inhibits the activity of nerve cells and thus has a calming and relaxing effect. Alcohol promotes the formation of GABA and itself can also dock onto GABA receptors. So all of our brains have these receptors, right? And what I want you guys to think about as an analogy here is that, the game, musical chairs or something like that. And I want you to kind of think about these chairs as like GABA receptors on the brain. Those chairs are devoted and dedicated for GABA, okay? Natural GABA production in the brain that's going to help you feel better, feel calm. It's going to battle anxiety, balance the emotions out. What alcohol does when we drink it, over time especially, is alcohol, instead of the GABA sitting in those chairs that's dedicated to the GABA or those receptors, alcohol will then take those seats in replacing the GABA, okay? Tricking the brain into thinking that GABA is being produced or needs to be produced. What happens over time is once the brain is getting this outside source of alcohol, which is hijacking these GABA receptors, the brain actually starts to suppress its own natural GABA production. So, this neurotransmitter that helps out with anxiety, when it is affected by alcohol over time, the neurotransmitter production starts to slow and lessen, therefore increasing the very thing that it's developed and designed to battle, which is anxiety. So a person that is drinking heavily when they are in a sober state, over time, they will actually become more anxious. Then that will draw them into doing what? Wanting to drink more to battle that anxiety. And once again, that's where the baseline mood starts to become affected, right? You may be, at a certain level where you're drinking and you're consuming, and it's like, I feel great. But over a span of time, you'll notice in the sober state, you're getting more and more anxious, which then kind of calls and pulls you to start drinking quicker and heavier because you just want to counter that feeling of anxiety. The second one here is serotonin. It's not called the happiness hormone without reason. It produces a pleasant feeling of well-being, has a stress reducing and even an anxiety relieving calming effect, just like GABA. And dopamine is also increasingly released by alcohol. It has, as a result, increased cravings for alcohol and decreased cravings over alcohol consumption often occur. This is because dopamine is a part of the reward system in the brain. You do see dopamine much when you look at addicted behaviors and things like that. When the brain overly releases dopamine, even if it be in a short span of time, you'll start to see over a period of time of a consistent use or participation in something that's addictive, the body will then start to crave that material or that chemical or whatever it is that is producing the dopamine production. And the brain will actually start to stifle itself to producing dopamine naturally, which then you start to feel the adverse effects of having low dopamine. Okay. So, once again, this is stuff that takes place when you are looking at a person that is consuming alcohol at a heavy rate But I want you once again to stop and think about the young individual, right? The 12 to 18-year-old, the one that hasn't even really been out in the world yet. By consuming alcohol in this fashion, in this way, it can be detrimental. So, reminder, drinking in moderation. Adults of legal drinking can choose not to drink. Drink in moderation by limiting intake to 2 drinks or less. For men, 1 drink or less in a day for women. We have the binge drinking, once again, definition there. And we have the heavy and chronic drinking definition there too. So I think that that's something just to remember and realize, because I don't want people to stop and go, okay, if I have 1 drink a week, is this going to happen to me? Okay. That's not what we're trying to do, especially, adults that may be watching this. But I do want young people that come across this to go, yes, my brain is developing. I don't want to put this chemical or this neurotoxin in my body to have these adverse effects on my brain, right? Even if it be in the immediate situation, or if it be that they risk possibly becoming addicted to it because of all the stuff it does to GABA and serotonin and dopamine and things like that. So very important for that. And once again, the side note, once I spoke about a little bit ago already with anxiety, binge and chronic alcohol drinking can exacerbate an existing anxiety disorder or may lead to new anxiety symptoms and vice versa, meaning that a pre-existing anxiety disorder can contribute to an alcohol use disorder, as many individuals use alcohol as an unhealthy coping mechanism. So that kind of speaks a little bit about to what I just spoke of a little bit ago, that if you are currently dealing with anxiety, just because alcohol may suppress that anxiety while consuming the alcohol, it is not going to get rid of the anxiety. If anything, studies are showing that it will exacerbate that pre-existing condition, right? Which will then just lead to you wanting to drink more and more alcohol. Chronic alcohol use affects your ability to respond to stress in healthy and effective ways, which can lead to anxiety. This may be due to alcohol's effect on the amygdala, the area of your brain that regulates negative emotions. So when you start messing with those feel-good hormones, when you start messing with dopamine and serotonin, and you start looking at GABA and the neurotransmitter that is GABA, once again, alcohol consumption affects those things, which will then in return not allow your brain to regulate negative emotions. Negative emotions aren't bad. We need them, right? We need cortisol, the stress hormone. We need to experience fear and even anger. These are things that we will experience to help keep us alive and navigate through the world. But when those things are affected to where they're not regulated properly, once again, in a young person's brain, especially 12 to 18 years old, remember that slide and all the stuff, throw in there already an inability to regulate those negative emotions in a proper fashion, once again, can be extremely harmful to a young person, um, and their brain developing properly. So, once again, how do kids fit into all of this? As I said, I want you to reflect back on this slide. Stormy and conflicted, uncertain, feel inadequate and insecure to trying to establish independence and identity. Worry about appearance, abilities, relationships, peer group influences can change attitudes and values. That's without alcohol. That's just normal development. Throw in all the stuff that we just covered in consuming alcohol. Throw in all the things that it does when it comes to baseline mood, anxiety, depression, hormone levels, neurotransmitter, all of that stuff. Add that on top of what's already going to be a very complicated and difficult time of their life. Um, you're going to have some issues. Those young people are going to deal with some issues. And once again, this isn't speaking about them just getting in a car and the normal things that could happen, right? The dangers that we've been talking about for generations and trying to warn them and say certain things about. This is just stuff that is what will take place in their body just by consuming this stuff in general. So I think that that stuff's very important to note. And once again, the whole "it will never happen to me" myth. As I said, you notice I didn't really, get too heavy on the classic and very real dangers of underage drinking that we grew up hearing about. Once again, drunk driving, getting in accidents and things like that. Kids, they do die in car crashes, or someone will get killed in a car crash because someone else is drinking alcohol. These are all real dangers, and they do need to be discussed. So I think it's important. And even go back to kind of that community and state influence when it comes to drinking. I think that we have seen a heavy an increase when it comes to parents and their willingness to then, let's say, allow kids to drink at home because the parents are afraid that something can happen to their kids because of these dangers that I just spoke about in regards to car crashes and all of that. But once again, I think that they're sidestepping the other issues that we just made this whole presentation about. So I get that a parent may go, well, my kid can drink if they're here at home, right? They're in the basement, they're 17, 18 years old. We'll let them drink here. We just know that they're safe. I hope this presentation at least shines some light on the fact that, okay, even though your kid may be safe from the car crashes and the car accidents and all that stuff, or even the legalities and the legal ramifications to an extent, there's still other dangers that are there. And then also there's legal ramifications for parents to allow their kids to drink at home. They could be a whole other slide. But I don't want parents to just stop and go, well, this is the solution, is just let them drink at home. Your kid is still ingesting a neurotoxin in their body during a stage of their life where their brain is still developing. And that can have ramifications on that kid's life as they become adults. So I think that that's something that should be noted and parents should recognize. So hopefully, this presentation does that and allows them to think. So um, drinking, though, it is seen as a social thing in our culture, but it can quickly turn into a coping mechanism, right? I think that that's something we all can look at. Even young people will turn to drinking because of the stresses of being young. But once again, those are just natural emotional characteristics that come along with their age and development. And I think it's important, once again, for us as adults to be involved in those conversations and to let them know, like, a lot of the stressors and the things that they're going through as kids is normal, right? These are just things of their body trying to figure itself out, that connection between the high brain and the low brain. All kids know or will know what it is like to go through something due to school or family. So all kids are susceptible to trying or using alcohol as a coping mechanism. So as long as there's stressors in this world and stressors in life, which every kid's going to go through something, there's always a possibility that a kid's going to resort to something to cope with it. And alcohol right now, as we just talked about, is the main substance that kids go to. The physical and psychological effects on a developed brain due to binge drinking or chronic drinking, they're severe. I'm not talking about just being an alcoholic. I think sometimes when I would do these presentations and talk to people, people were assuming that I was just talking about people that are like diagnosed as alcoholics. I'm talking about people that are just binge drinkers, chronic drinkers, right? And once again, that could go, that especially goes into adults, but this is a focus more on that young developing brain. The effects on a developing brain obviously can be just as severe, if not worse, with damaging onset effects taking place sooner in one's life. So if I'm 30 something years old and I start binge drinking, like, yeah, the effects of that may not be felt as soon as a person that is starting to binge drink maybe at 14, 15 years old. And once again, that is affecting that individual's baseline mentality and personality. So, and this is something I like to show between the years of 2016 and 2019, kind of looking at depression, anxiety, and behavior disorders by age. So you can kind of view this chart. They have increased over the years leading up to this poll being taken, and I guarantee they're continuing to go up. I would be interested to see if I can find something more recent. These numbers are going to go up because guess what? Drinking among young people is going to go up, or drinking among young people is going to go up because these numbers are going up. So, that's kind of the thing that we try to stop and figure out. Do young adults drink because they have pre-existing issues, or are they developing these issues because they're drinking? But here's the fact of the matter, the issues are still there. So um, I think it's being found out more that people, because these issues in the world that we live in, social media, the news being constantly in front of our faces, societal ills and norms, social pressure, and all of that stuff, things are definitely more intense now and more polarized than they've ever been. So they're finding that depression, anxiety, and behavior disorders seem to be more prevalent, which is causing, it seems to be, younger people turning to substances to try to cope with that. Once again, the substance of choice seems to be alcohol with young people in our country. So kind of staggering numbers. Once again, I'm curious to see what they would look at or look like more in more of a recent poll. So with all that being said, what can we do for our kids? We can teach young people about the dangers of underage alcohol use. Once again, this presentation's kind of a start. I mean, I think it could be something that you could show a kid. It's something that I talked to my kids about. I know when I did this a couple of years ago, I used it as an example to kind of speak to my kids, but it's stuff I think they already knew and being my kid. But once again, I wanted them to have that education, that information. Get the word out about policies to prevent underage drinking. So great things like what the Substance Abuse Task Force is doing in Haley, that fits into that community and that state kind of influence there that we have. It isn't a matter of just once again demonizing the substance. It is a matter, though, of presenting the dangers that come along with using it improperly or using it in a fashion, a way where young people who are underage are consuming it as well. So I think those policies are critical. Organize groups to change community thinking about underage alcohol use. Once again, falls into line with that. Maybe the community you live in and all of that, maybe the state, I don't know, whatever. Maybe there's just not a lot of stuff out there because once again, people just view it as it's just alcohol, right? There needs to be information out there. There needs to be some transparency with the studies that have come out, especially in recent years with alcohol, to get people to have a seat of understanding, if you will, to be able to really rationalize and navigate and make what I call educated decisions for their body. Let teens involved with underage drinking know that it's okay to ask for and get help. I think that that sometimes seems to be a thing as well, where kids think, okay, it's something I'm doing, but I don't want to say anything because I don't want to get in trouble. I think young people would be very, very surprised to know that, local community mental health organizations like Pines here in Branch County, they are geared and ready to start helping individuals out when it comes to people that maybe are dealing with some addictions. It isn't like you're going to, get arrested by coming forth and saying that you have a problem. I think that once again, though, that is stuff that needs to be told to these young people, right? Like speak to them and say, like, if you feel like you have a problem, you need to go and get help or approach someone about it as well. Help people learn about the latest research on underage drinking or alcohol use. Once again, this is a presentation that I like to present because I feel like this is information that is somewhat or very up to date. And I think it's important that people have that understanding and create programs, volunteer work where young people can grow and feel good about themselves without alcohol. Once again, alcohol has become a huge coping mechanism in our culture. We've developed mindsets now to where we've had a rough week at work and we just feel like, hey, it's time to go out and let off some steam and get, maybe go get some drinks or something like that. That's coping. Even if it be a drink or if it be 10 drinks, that is a coping mechanism that people are using alcohol for. It's not just being used in a celebratory fashion. So we have to stop and evaluate that stuff with ourselves, especially if young people see that being done in the adult life. The young person may think that that's something they should start doing as well. But once again, creating those programs, some kind of volunteer work where young people can grow and feel good about life actually without alcohol or themselves without using alcohol. That is it. That is everything that I have. Like I said, in going through this presentation, your brain goes and you're like, okay, there's more things I could probably talk about, but I want to make sure I don't go too long. If you have any questions about anything on this PowerPoint, this presentation, like I said, test the things that I said. This is my contact information here. I have my email address and my direct line here at the health department, but I truly do appreciate you guys taking the time and listening to the presentation.
Thank you, Josh. That was really good. I appreciate it.